All right, everyone. So today we're going to look at how to use LoggerPro to get data from a movie file. Not going to go through how to install LoggerPro. Those instructions are published elsewhere. Just refer to those. Let me know if you have any issues. So first thing to note is that we're going to insert the movie. A common mistake at this point is to say File Open Movie. Don't do that. It's Insert Movie. We'll navigate to where we stored the movie and we will open it. So here we go. Movie has been imported into LoggerPro. I trimmed this movie, so it's just the part I need to gather the data. But you can navigate throughout the movie. There are standard buttons, play, stop. And these two are frame-by-frame shuttles, which are quite useful, allowing you to exactly position it where you want it. I'm going to start at the beginning, so I'll just return to beginning. When you're ready to gather data, you can resize this window too. When you're ready to gather data, these three red dots with the arrow open up another little menu. The first thing we're going to do is tell LoggerPro how big things are in the movie. So to do that, I click this meter stick, fourth button down, horizontal stick, and I am just going to click and draw a line the length of the meter stick. It's a green line, notice. If it's not a green line, then you click the wrong meter stick on the side there. I'm using a meter stick, so distance 1 meters for the unit is correct. I don't need to change anything there, but if you need to, you can. Okay, so now the computer knows that that is 1 meter. It can measure everything relative to that. The other thing I need to do is set the origin. So that's the third button down here. It's going to tell the computer where to measure from. And I'm going to set it over here. And perhaps you might want to predict if I put my origin over here and the card is going to be moving in this direction towards it, what might that data look like? What kind of graph would that produce? One of the nice things about LoggerPro is that you can change the position of your origin after you've gathered data, and I'll show you what that would look like at the end of this little video. So finally here, add point, this little red dot with the little crosshairs. That's going to let us choose a point on the cart, and I click and it puts a dot there. And when I do that, it moves the movie forward by 1 frame. I do it again, moves it forward by 1 frame. Do it again, and again, and again, and again, and we die slowly inside from monotonous boredom. So I can make some changes here that will allow me to complete this task in a slightly easier way. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change how many frames LoggerPro advances the movie by for every point that I make. But first, let's make a deliberate mistake. Oh dear, I accidentally put a dot in the middle of my forehead. That's going to mess up all my data. I need to get rid of it. Well, don't worry. Just go into select mode, choose this little white arrow, select the dot that you want to get rid of, delete key. There, it's gone. So still using the select tool, if I double click on this movie, it opens up a little dialog box. And we don't need to mess with any of these options here right now. Sometimes it's useful to change the frame rate if you weren't filming at standard number of frames per second. But in this case, we were. This is the one I want here. Advance the movie, how many frames for each point? I'm going to change that 1 to a 5. Now you'll see I'll go back to select data, and every time I click that same point, now it jumps forward 5 frames. And for this movie, that's plenty. If this was a fast moving object, it might make sense to put a data point on every frame. And if it was moving slower, we might have wanted to change it to 1 data point every 10 frames. It will just depend on what you've measured. Not just how fast the object's moving, but also the frame rate of the movie. And this is something that you can feel free to play around with. So there we go. Let's see what that looks like. I'm going to move this movie to the background. And don't worry, the movie isn't vanished. It's still there. It's just hiding behind this graph here. I can just get it back if I need to. Switch between the movie and the graph. No problem. And you can see it's given us 2 different traces. This blue trace at the bottom, which is labeled Y meters, and then the red one, which is labeled X meters. This Y one is very boring, those blue dots, just a flat line. That kind of makes sense, though, because that's how far up or down the table the cart went. And it didn't. It just went across it. These red dots are showing us how the motion of the cart changed over time. And you can see we started with a large positive displacement of somewhere more than 1, less than 1.25, so maybe 1.2-ish meters. We can look and see exactly what it was in the data in a moment. So we started over there, and then we're getting closer and closer and closer to 0 meters, right? So we're coming closer and closer towards the origin. So when I asked you guys at the beginning what would that graph look like, and you visualized that shape, then well done. Now you can get graphical analysis from LoggerPro, but typically what I'm going to ask you to do is just to take the data from LoggerPro, put it into either Excel to analyze, or sometimes we might actually plot a graph manually. So here's the data over on the left-hand side. It looks like there's only 2 columns, but there's more. In fact, there's quite a few columns hiding in here. And in this case, the only bits of data that I'm interested in are time and my X displacement. Y displacement is essentially 0. I know these numbers are not all the same and they're not 0, but they are all very close to 0. And I'm also not going to look at these data for X and Y velocity. Those of you doing AP physics, we will get heavily into those a little bit later, how this X and Y velocity are calculated from these 2 columns, but not right now. So I'm just going to highlight the data that I do want, my times and my X positions, and then I'm straightforward copy, open a spreadsheet in Excel, and paste them. And then we can do our analysis. But that's a separate video, how to do that if you're not already familiar. So there we go. That's how to get data from a video file. Oh, I said I would show you what happens to the data if I move the origin. So let me just do that. So you'll notice that at the moment, with the origin in the position that it's in, we start off over here with a value of about 1.16. I was predicting about 1.2 meters, so not too far away. And then as time passes, that number gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it reaches essentially 0. So what happens if I take my origin, I put it at the other end, okay? So I go back to the Select Origin tool, and now I'm going to move it over to there. Well, what did all of my data do? You'll notice that now I am starting at essentially a value of 0 up here, right? So I start at 0 displacement. I know it's not quite 0, but it's close. And you'll also notice that it's negative because it's on the left-hand side of the origin. We are moving into negative X there. And as time goes by, these numbers get bigger and bigger and bigger in the negative. And if we look at what that would look like on our graph, then now we are in a different quadrant. It's a similar looking graph, but we're in a different quadrant. We start at the origin and we are getting further and further away, but in the negative X. So LoggerPro, very versatile, very useful. We'll be using it a lot this year because we won't be able to all be in the lab together to measure data in that way. So I'll be trying to provide you with movies that you can do the analysis from by yourselves.